Major funding for Marcia Adams Heartland Cooking is provided by Maple Leaf Farms, a symbol for ducklings and frozen entrees, chef quality you can count on. By Souter Woodworking, America's furniture craftsman. With more than 50 years' experience, Souter provides ready-to-assemble furniture for today's home and office. By Marilat Industries, America's cabinet maker, committed to quality in a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles.
Hello there and welcome to Heartland Cooking. Today's show is titled Very Special Things. I want to show you some nostalgic old recipes that have long been a part of our Midwestern heritage. Maybe they'll become part of yours. They're centuries old and are very chic actually today and can be used for entertaining, partly because they're delicious and partly because they embody an element of surprise. Before you know it, you'll have a reputation as a hostess who serves really good food as well as something unusual. So let's start on these very special things. The first recipe is a perfect brunch dish, one which happens to be one of my favorite ways to entertain, I would say. The dish that I'm going to talk to you about is called grits, but it's not a dish made with corn at all. This grits is spelled G-R-I-T-Z, and we begin a little bit in advance, as you know, so this will all be ready for you. So get out your pencil and paper, and I'm going to tell you what I've done ahead of time. In a very large stew pan or a tall kettle, I have combined 1 1/2 pounds of boneless beef chuck, 1 1/2 pounds of pork shoulder, 1 onion, 1 bay leaf, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 6 whole cloves. Cover this with water and simmer it for 3 minutes. Now your pork may be done a little bit in advance. Take it out early if it is nice and tender. Then while it's warm, pulse it in the food processor until it's quite fine, like this. Return 5 cups of broth to a deep pan again. And to this, we're going to add the grits part. You're going to use 1 1/4 cups quick cooking barley, not the slow cooked, but the quick cooking barley, and 1 1/4 cups of old-fashioned oatmeal, not the quick cook. You see, now it's just opposite. Slow oatmeal, quick barley, and stir that in. And then we're going to add some very nice spices. 3/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, and 1/4 teaspoon salt and pepper. And I'll repeat that to you. 3/4 teaspoon nutmeg, 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, and 1/4 teaspoon salt and pepper. Now cover this and let this simmer for 30 minutes on the stove. And while that's simmering, I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's all finished. Smells great. Can you see in here? It really looks like very, very thick oatmeal. And to this, we're going to add the wonderful meat that we have prepared earlier. I want to tell you how I got this recipe. One afternoon, the doorbell rang, and there stood a man and his wife from Indianapolis. And they watched this show, and they knew that I was really interested in old recipes. Notice that I am stirring in the pre-chopped meats quite thoroughly. They brought to me as a gift an entire photocopy of the man's mother's recipes that she had collected over a lifetime. Now, I'd never met these people before in my life, and here they had done this lovely thing for me. I spent several evenings going through that cookbook, and I found lots of old recipes that were really good, and some that I'd been looking for, like this one for grits. Now, transfer the stirred mixture to a greased 9x5 loaf pan and pack it in very, very firmly. And then, when this is all packed in well, and do pack it firmly again, I want to re-emphasize that, chill it until it is firm. Chill it overnight. And one thing I would advise that you do is not cover it, because the condensation of this hot meat is apt to make it a little bit watery. I believe, incidentally, that I said to you to simmer this mixture for 3 minutes instead of 3 hours. Simmer the oatmeal barley mixture for, excuse me, that isn't it at all. You simmer the meat mixture for 3 hours, and you simmer this grits mixture for 30 minutes. I hope you're not hopelessly confused. I think I understand it now, so I pray you do too. Now we fry the grits. After it's chilled overnight, this is what it looks like, very much like a meatloaf. And put some oil in a skillet and bring it up to about medium high and cut the loaf in 1/2 inch pieces and saute it on both sides until it's golden brown. And this is just beginning to sizzle. And it's just quite delicious when you're finished. This was also called breakfast grits, and it's similar to scrapple, except that it has no cornmeal. This was made more by northern cooks as a way of using up the scraps after butchering, but it's very glamorous. Serve it with maple syrup or sorghum, or even, let me see, you could use boiled cider if you could find it. Now, another early recipe that I want to tell you about is vinegar pie, and it's truly delicious. These pies were popular all over the Midwest among those early cooks who had to prepare meals from the ingredients that they had on hand. This pie, when it's finished, is opaque and quivery and spicy, rather like a pudding pie. And if you didn't know there was vinegar in it, you would never guess, because it just adds a nice tang. You begin by beating 3 egg yolks, and then in a bowl, have 1 cup of brown sugar, and add to that 5 tablespoons of flour, and a teaspoon of allspice, 1/4 of a teaspoon of mace, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. And mix this all together with your hands. And that sort of, you see, evens the flour into the sugar. And then beat that into the egg yolks. And then to that, you're going to want to add 1/4 of a cup of vinegar. Now that's not very much vinegar, actually. I have seen this done with 1 cup of vinegar and 1 cup of water. So that really would be a very sharp pie. And now to this, we're going to add 2 cups of hot water. Incidentally, this is cider vinegar. Make sure you use cider vinegar. That's what the old-time cooks would have used. This was another favorite recipe of boarding house cooks because, again, it was rather economical. You see, during those early years, the 1800s and the early 1900s, lemons were still costly and considered a very special thing. Now you're going to cook this over hot water, and make sure that the hot water is touching the bottom of the pan. Transfer all this into your double boiler top. And then you're going to want to cook this for 25 minutes over the simmering water. Now, when I say 25 minutes, you could even get this done as early as maybe 15 minutes. This depends on how high you leave your water, the density of your pan. When it is thickened, and I do want you to stand here and stir it periodically. In other words, don't go out and water the flowers. You have to sort of be in the kitchen for this. Stir this periodically, and then when it's nice and thick at the end, and you'll be able to tell, add 1/4 cup margarine or 1/4 cup butter to this mixture, and then pour it immediately into a baked 9-inch pie shell. We have one already done for you because I want to put a meringue on this pie, because this is a special kind of a meringue. And I have requests for how to make a decent meringue. People seem to have trouble with it. To begin with, one of the secrets of a good meringue is to have your egg whites at room temperature. Incidentally, doesn't that pie look great? It sort of looks like a butterscotch pie, but it doesn't taste anything like it. And in your mixer bowl, put together 3 egg whites, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of cider vinegar. And then you beat this until soft peaks form, and then you gradually add, this has been made for a while, so it's a little bit floppy, but that's okay. You gradually add 6 tablespoons of granulated sugar. And then just as those egg whites are like clouds, you add 1 1/2 teaspoons of cornstarch. Now, I would tell you that one problem that people seem to have with meringues is that that they shrink in the oven. So bring them way over to the edge of the pan, because they're definitely going to shrink in the oven. There's no question about it. This is not as puffy as it ought to be. There we are. Now bake this meringue at 325 degrees in the middle of your oven for 15 to 18 minutes. And I'm just going to set this over here and get it out of sight. And here is what our pie looks like when it's all finished. Isn't that gorgeous? That would make anybody proud. This is so easy, you must be sure to try this recipe. The next thing I'm going to show you is not really a recipe, it's more of a method. And it's lots of fun. Early cooks used to season vinegar for cooking and salad dressings. Contrary to what some people think, even Indians ate raw greens, and so did the early settlers. You know, early pioneers really created very good meals using the resources that they had available. And this included the wild fruits and the berries and the plants and even the flowers. And the next recipe that we're going to do has to do with flowers. I'm going to show you how to make violet vinegar. And it's just one of the most interesting recipes I've come across. It's old, but it's very, very new. First of all, I think I should show you what the finished product looks like. See? 4 days ago, I put this on my windowsill, and the violets were intensely purple, and the vinegar was transparent. 4 days later, I have bleached violets and very beautiful vinegar, and I'm going to fish out these violets. I've left them in just for you to see. They're rather unappetizing at this portion. And ordinarily, I would strain this, but just to save time, we'll do it this way. So you end up with this beautiful, beautiful lavender vinegar with a very delicate flavor. Now I've got to stir this over here. There we are. Make sure I've got the right burner on. Goodness me, it takes a lot of coordination to have all these things going. It's worse than at home getting ready for a dinner party for 20. Then we're going to actually make the vinegar, and this is how you do it. It's simplicity itself. The best part of the job, of course, is going out to the woods and gathering the violets. You want to have enough violets to totally fill your container. This is the way you do it. Just stuff those violets right down into the jar. You can have some stems in if you like, but not many. You're really after more bloom than stem. And then over the top, you pour unseasoned rice white wine vinegar. Now, there's no question in my mind that the pioneers did not have this vinegar, but in updating it for today's kitchens, it's really better to use this clear, very delicate vinegar because you will be able to taste the violet flavor easier. And then you don't even have to heat that. Did you notice that? I didn't even heat it. And then you just put this on your windowsill and you watch it change color and you end up with a very beautiful product. This would make a very, very nice Christmas gift. Now to make the salad dressing, again, simplicity. 1/2 cup of commercial mayonnaise, 1 teaspoon here of the sugar, and just regular sugar, and then we're going to add a tablespoon and a teaspoon of the violet vinegar. And you know what? I hear my pot still jumping around over there, and I'm going to have to go over there and do something. I'm right in the kitchen, just like I told you people that you should be. That ought to take care of that. It's not thickening up yet, just beginning to on the bottom. Right. So then you take your whisk. I shall repeat this: 1/2 cup of commercial mayonnaise, a tablespoon and a teaspoon of the violet vinegar, and a teaspoon of sugar, and you end up really with almost an ivory color mayonnaise. And it's just a superb recipe and very unusual. You know, Thoreau has a very nice quote pertaining to this whole thing of going out into the countryside. He said, "The fields and the hills are a table constantly spread." The greens we're using in our salad today are wild ones. They've been gathered locally, though you can get them sometimes from specialty food purveyors. Dandelions are certainly the most common of the wild greens and are frequently sold at farmers markets. If they're in bloom, they're considered too chewy and bitter, so don't eat them except in the early spring. Also native to the Midwest is the curly or narrow dock, and you can see why it's so named. It grows along roadsides and in the fields, and it's easy to spot. Lamb's quarters has a mild spinach-like flavor, and it pops up all over the garden and on the lawn too sometimes. And sorrel is also called spinach dock or herb patience dock. And of course we have them, you see, on a plate with these pretty edible flowers, nasturtiums, which one of the herbalists calls a nose twister, and you can use pansies or Johnny jump-ups. A wonderful way then is to combine all the greens in a lovely bowl and sprinkle the pansies on top. Another wild food treasure is morel mushrooms. Finding enough for a whole meal has to be the ultimate for the person in pursuit of wild or natural foods. These delicate, spongy-looking mushrooms are only in season about 2 weeks in the spring. There's a theory that they're most frequently found at the bases of old apple and elm trees. If you happen to be lucky enough to have a whole lot of them, and that's truly lucky, you can dry them and then reconstitute them either in water or wine before using. The fourth special thing is sassafras. In the country, early spring used to be synonymous with a fragrant pink sassafras tea that was considered a tonic. It thinned the blood and took away the winter blahs. And it's a very simple recipe to do and a charming one as well. It's maybe something you ought to teach your children. First of all, I want to show you what sassafras tea looks like. There it is. Is that interesting? When I visited my grandmother, and I was very little, she would make the tea for me to drink and serve it in her very best green flowered Haviland and sweetened with milk. It tasted a little bit like root beer to me. Now, sassafras tea is made from the roots of the tree, and some people use the outer covering and some use the whole root. Now, my recipe calls for using 1 teaspoon of sassafras to 4 cups of boiling water. And incidentally, for good tea, that's very important, is to using boiling water to infuse it. And you just pour that over like this. There. The best time, of course, to dig sassafras roots is in the early spring when the roots are dormant. And you can either use it when it's fresh or dried. And it's certainly a harbinger of spring. I think I can add a little more water to that. The Indians certainly used a lot of sassafras. They ground up the leaves and they used it as a poultice for wounds. They drank the tea also. They added maple syrup to theirs. They were smart people, weren't they? And really, some old timers do too. And the Indians and pioneers also used the branches of the sassafras for toothbrushes. And that's what that looks like when it's all finished. Isn't that pretty? Sassafras tea. It's the relic of the past, a pioneer oddity. You know, my mother taught school for many years. She taught 4th grade. And one thing she did every spring was to bring in sassafras tea, and she made it for her classes because she wanted them to see what it was. And you do not find sassafras in the grocery stores. You'll have to find it probably at a farmer's market. Let's review what we did today because we've had some special things, as you know. Old-fashioned grits, spelled with a Z, is a down-to-earth brunch dish, ideal for entertaining. The intriguing vinegar pie, slightly tart with a touch of allspice. Spring greens, gathered from the fields, accompanied by a delicately flavored violet vinegar salad dressing. And to finish our program on very special things, the cozy and nostalgic sassafras tea. All of these foods that we've prepared today may have been served on the dishes I'm going to show you. Many of you will recognize the china pattern. It's called tea leaf. In earlier years, it was also known as luster band and luster band spray, as well as sprig. I really like that term, sprig. Nearly 30 English firms made it, including Wedgwood. It was so popular then that 20 American firms made it as well, and it's still being manufactured today. From your letters, I know that many of you collect cookbooks. I would guess you might have searched far and wide looking for a special copy of something. There is a person who might be able to help. Jan Langoni and her husband Dan are culinary historians and have a distinguished collection of 15,000 cookbooks, most of which are quite old. The Wine and Food Library is located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it's truly an American treasure. Jan's in the studio with us today. Hi, Jan.
Hello.
Welcome to Ohio. And what have you brought today?
Well, in honor of your program of the 8 Midwestern states, I brought one book from each of the 8 states, some very colorful early American, mostly 19th century cookery items, a facsimile of the first cookbook published in America, written by an American at 1796 by an orphan named Amelia Simmons. And I brought this to show you because it has to do with why my own collection is Americana. This is notes from the Oxford Symposium on Culinary History at Oxford University in England. And I spoke in England, and there were many esoteric speeches on food patterns of small tribes in New Zealand and things of that nature.
Everything we're passionately interested in.
Yes,
Of
right.
course, you
When
know.
I get up to speak and mention this cookbook, Philomelia Ann Harden's, everybody's cook and receipt book, but more particularly designed for Buckeyes, Hoosiers, Wolverines, corn crackers, suckers, and all epicures who wish to live with the present times, that was published in Cleveland in 1842. No one in the audience knew what I was talking about.
You were esoteric to them.
Yes, and I made up my mind that American cooking needed to be better known, and so I decided to devote my own life to collecting early Americana and sharing it with people.
I think that's a wonderful story, and I'm sure it's become an obsession in a way, has it not?
Yes.
I dare say, with the 15,000 books. Now, your husband specializes in wine, is that correct?
Yes, my husband's a professor at the University of Michigan in chemistry, but his avocation is wine history and wine book history, and he's lectured all over the world on that subject, as well as on chemistry.
Oh, and you lecture as well.
Yes, I've just come back from lecturing on food of the Founding Fathers at Kenmore in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which is the home of George Washington's sister.
Oh,
a lovely
fascinating.
home.
Fascinating. Now, you brought some books with you, which I was so touched since it was a coincidence because this show was planned 2 years ago. And when I told you that it was going to have violet vinegar, you said, oh, I might have some books on violets. Would you explain what this is to
Yes.
the viewers?
There are many kinds of books that the bookshop has. This is a book on the history of flowers and the history of flower cookery, actually. And there's a whole section, I've marked it here, on violet cookery. And you will see there are violet recipes going back to the 16th century that we have records of, including some mention of violet vinegar. And I thought I might show you, if you'll forgive me for going over you. This is a facsimile of a 1655 book, a very famous English book, and it has a lovely early recipe for violet conserve.
Oh, wonderful. And I see violet ice in here
Yes.
and violet mousse.
Yes.
And what is this? The cook's own book? What
Yes, this is the first alphabetically arranged culinary encyclopedia published in the United States in 1832 in Boston, written by Mrs. Lee. And there are a whole page of violet recipes. I thought you would enjoy.
Truly.
We have talked about old recipes and about whether anything is new under the sun, and I always laugh. This also has recipes for raspberry vinegar, which everyone thinks is very nouvelle cuisine.
And it isn't at all.
No, not at all.
I mentioned that earlier in the show, that the recipes that we did today are truly very chic. They may be dated of another period, but they deserve a wide audience because they're so fine. And I'm just thrilled that there are people like you who are, more or less promoting this, because it does need recognition that these recipes are fine and deserve our attention. Now, what do you see new in food history? Because you have a big overview. What's new?
Yes. Well, there isn't a lot new under the sun. There are recurring patterns, the interest in health food, in vegetarianism, in, quote, exotic foreign foods.
That's all been done before.
All been done, and almost in every country. What may be new is perhaps the introduction of some of the very specialized tropical fruits into our cooking, because although we had some tropical fruits early on, say in America, we certainly didn't have kiwis and all of the exotic things we're now getting from New Zealand.
Is there any kind of cookbook you don't have?
Well, I don't carry diet cookery for several reasons. One is because I really am not an expert in that field, and there are so many fads, and I'm truly not interested in promoting fads. In addition, they're not a lot of fun, and we want people to be interested in sharing food with people.
Very good. I'm glad to hear that. Now, it is the sharing of these old recipes, though we are here on a TV set in Ohio, and the viewers are scattered from Vermont to California. It's these old recipes that connect us all through our shared history of cookery and our heritage recipes, such as we find in these precious old books. It's another way we establish our bonds with one another. So until next time, essa gut, eat good.
Major funding for Marcia Adams Heartland Cooking is provided by Maple Leaf Farms, a symbol for ducklings and frozen entrees, chef quality you can count on. By Souter Woodworking, producers of ready-to-assemble furniture for the home and office, America's furniture craftsmen with more than a half-century of experience. By Marilad Industries, America's cabinet maker, committed to quality in a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles.